Welcome to How to Decorate from Ballard Designs, a weekly podcast all about the trials and triumphs of decorating and redecorating your home. I'm Caroline, I'm on the marketing team.
And I'm Taryn, and I'm a product designer.
I'm Liz, I head up the creative team.
We're your hosts. Join the expert team at Ballard Designs for tips, tricks, and tales from interior designers, stylists, and other talents in the design world.
Plus, we'll answer your decorating dilemmas at the end of each episode.
We love answering your questions, so don't forget to email us at podcast@ballarddesigns.net.
Now, on with the show.
You might remember today's guest from his years on Bravo's hit TV show, $1 Million Decorators, or perhaps his first book, The Meaning of Home, published in 2013, or maybe one of his countless features and design Bibles like Elle Decor, Architectural Digest, and House Beautiful. With roots in California, training in London, and projects all over the country, we're excited to talk about his newest book, publishing this month, This is Home with Rizzoli. Welcome to the show, Jeffrey Allen Marks.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Yes, we were so thrilled to get a copy of your book and to get to read it. And so we're just thrilled to have you here. So thanks for being here.
The book, picks up 10 years later after the first book. But, things have changed for me personally. I've moved all over the world and back again and married now. And I have a little daughter, which a few of you have seen, who's 5 years old. Her name is James, and that makes writing the book and doing my design practice day to day very different than it looked 10 years ago.
There's a gorgeous picture of your family and like the insides, the very first image, I think all of you on the beach. So it was so beautiful to see. What a gorgeous shot. But I love in the introduction, you talk about growing up all over California, and then you moved to England and studied and, sort of, I guess, had your introduction into interior design there.
I think that really stemmed my style there too. I mean, working for people like John Stefanidis and being an intern at Colfax and Fowler and all the great old interior design houses really changed my view on design and how I look at things.
Well, I loved that. I mean, I think all of that little nugget about your background was the first paragraph of your introduction. And it almost was just the entire sort of thesis of the book wrapped into one, because that kind of is your style. It's like this California cool and like streamlined mixed with this, patina English coziness. And like that's just every project I was like, oh, there's maybe a little more California here or a little more English here, but like each one had that, had that combination of styles. So that was the perfect way to kick it off.
Oh, thank you.
So, maybe you could kind of tell any of our listeners who are just getting to know you for the first time, you mentioned growing up in California. What is it maybe that you sort of, I also want to mention, actually, just even to start, everything happening in California right now. And as I was reading the book, I kept thinking back to all of the fires and really kind of worried about your projects and your clients and you.
I know, it's very sad. We've had some, about 8 friends now that have lost their houses completely.
Wow.
Because I lived in the Palisades for 15 years prior to moving to Santa Barbara, prior to being in Greenwich. So a lot of my early design years were there in the Palisades. So I've done a lot of houses and I have a lot of friends, and it is very sad. I know they will rebuild, but it's easier, said than done. It's not going to happen overnight, and it's going to be a lot of work for all of us. And we're trying to do everything we can right now to just, we've all sort of donated clothes, but they need more than that. They need, beds and sheets and towels and a place to live. And, the rentals in Los Angeles are, crazy now because people are trying to get their kids back in school, and their kids have all sorts of questions, and it's a very hard time. So yeah, we our hearts go out to California. Yes, and I would say most of my design work was based there, and will be again.
Yeah. Yeah. You kick off the book with your own kind of seaside cottage there in Montecito, and maybe tell everybody about that project, because I thought that was a fun way to start. It really sort of gave this perfect glimpse into the rest of the book.
That was a really important house for me in my evolution, I think, as a designer. It's my first real family house that I designed for a baby and a husband and dogs and whatnot. Entertaining is very different now. I love that little house. It's so sweet. It's near Butterfly Beach. You can walk to the beach. I would say because of the house felt a little bit like being in the Cotswolds, we definitely went a little more English with it than California vibe. Um, but I think it works out really well, and it's great light, and I love the gardens. I think it's one of the first houses I had that isn't on a hillside, so it was nice to have that garden and to work in the garden. And I found out that I really liked gardening, which is something later in life to learn.
Right? I don't think you learn
It's
it
very
in your
calming.
20s. Yeah, you have to learn it.
Yeah. No.
All of a sudden, you're like, this is
Yeah.
relaxing and rewarding. And
I think, Martha Stewart says it in her documentary, like, if you want a friend for life, like, start a garden, to be happy forever.
yeah.
So that's really my happy place these days. Back to my California style, I think it's a mixture of getting that laid back quality mixed with beautiful antiques, and how do you mix that, and how do you incorporate that in a way that doesn't feel heavy and like your grandmother did it. I think that's important for me to, bring a lightness to that look that I think the California light and just the California feel. I mean, my house in Connecticut is very, very different and feels more English, and it's a Georgian style house, but people that walk into it can see that it's very inspired by California.
I love that about your style. I think that's what I found just the most compelling is you use antiques so liberally throughout your projects, and yet the spaces do not, as a whole, feel traditional. I wouldn't say they don't feel traditional at all, but they don't feel traditional. They feel, fresh and clean, and yet so many of the pieces in there are these, kind of classic shapes. And so I'm curious, like, was that something that you were just kind of inherently, that's just the way you see things put together? Or is this sort of something that took you some time to really develop as like I guess a trademark?
I think it did take time to develop. I think that, it's all about the mix and what to put next to, an item to make it feel youthful again. And I think it's all about what how you incorporate one piece of furniture next to the other and how they merge together is important to me. But also the space itself, I think the architecture has to be, if you do have a lot of antiques, very minimal and clean and airy and not overly um, overly decorated. I think it's about probably moving in slowly. It's funny, we're just moving house again, and I'm keeping this house that we're moving into very sparing right now, because I want the time in that house to be able to breathe and to um, see where I want to go. And I think a lot of people, as they get older, probably go a little bit more minimal, but you have to bring also the pieces you've loved throughout your life with you too. So it's all about the balance of how you merge those together, you know.
Yeah. So can you walk us through a little bit? Like you said, it's more about what you're putting next to one another. So say, for example, you've got like, kind of a traditional house, and you've got some traditional pieces. Like what kind of, would you then go more clean? Like what are sort of like the questions you're asking yourself, I guess?
I think if you have a traditional house, it's really all about color. I think that's a big one for me. Um, but I think it's about using it sparingly and using it correctly and using it in the right context. I think is important. Um, but to answer that question, I'm never afraid of mixing high-low. Like, I'm happy to mix something that is, West Elm next to a beautiful antique, and I think that makes both pieces stand out, and look authentic and youthful and bright and not overly done. I think you can't mix too much of the same thing. Um, you can't use all antiques, or you can't use all West Elm, whether it be that. I think you have to, it's just all about the mix. And I think that, um, what, I'm moving furniture all around all the time, and, and seeing how it changes when it moves from room to room. And my husband hates me for it because he's tripping over ottomans and things that, weren't there yesterday, and now they're there, and I test them out, and maybe they might move again. We don't know.
Mhm.
But I think it's always fun for me to see, whether it be an old piece or just a piece I, bought at the mall that day, next to something, and how it brings new life to the whole room.
Mhm. Kind of on that thread, there were so many very modern architecturally houses in the book, and I was always so surprised at how you decorated them. Some antique rugs, or like a great sort of patina wingback leather chair, that kind of thing. And I imagine that if any of our listeners are out there and they either have a more modern house or they fantasize about it, that's not really sort of the choices you would make. Are there any kind of, like, I guess, guidelines you would think through with a modern house specifically, and bringing antiques in? They sort of feel like it could be hard to incorporate without doing it,
It
strategically.
is hard to incorporate. I think you need to bring them in one at a time and see how they react in the house, and a contemporary house is very different light than a traditional house, only because for the most part, they have bigger windows, and they have more light, and they have lighter floors, and it's more open in general. So it is very hard to just bring an old hand-me-down antique into a more contemporary house. So it's all about what you put with it, what scale you put it, where you put it. I think it's harder to do a contemporary house than it is a traditional house, because a traditional house you can throw in anything and it looks great, and it looks cozy and looks English, and it's a very different look than doing a very sparing contemporary house. And I think that's what I'm going through right now with this house that I'm doing is, you're moving things in from a very traditional house to a contemporary. It's a nice exercise, if you will.
Well, I would think that everything would have to be so, uh, like, I guess, carefully selected, because,
Yeah,
yeah,
it is.
you don't
It's
have the
much more
moldings.
careful. Yeah, it's much more careful than. Um, I love doing traditional work because you can almost throw in anything, and it looks great, and
Mhm.
it looks cozy, and probably where my own personal style was for years, even when I was doing people's houses, that were much more contemporary. It's funny how my clients have changed, and this year marks my 30th year doing this job, and how my clients have changed in that time. Obviously they've were much older than me, and now they're much younger than me.
Mhm.
So I'm learning from both. I think took from my clients that were, 60 when I was 30, and now it's the opposite.
Mhm.
And, and it's fun to sort of see where people's heads are today, and where they were. And, I think everyone wants their own space, whether it just be a corner out of the room or, a 10,000 square foot house. I think they want their space to feel uniquely like them.
Mhm.
And that really is what the book is about, is, um, you know, a collection of houses that I've done over the past 10 years that are all very different. And the people are all very different. So, and they're all over the place.
Mhm.
They're not, one's in Greenwich, one's in Austin, one's in Marin, um, Los Angeles, Manhattan Beach, La Jolla. So I think just having that experience, I think a lot of designers don't get that, because my New York, for instance, friends that are designers have only worked in New York City, and which is sort of crazy and mind-boggling to me that a lot of designers just stay in their own sort of 30-mile radius,
Mhm.
which is great. Nothing wrong with it. It's just I've had the experience of working sort of all over the place, and
Sure.
got to see how people live in different parts of the country.
What are some of the things that your recent clients have been teaching you? You said you've sort of been picking things up. Um, I'm just curious what some examples are. Because I think there was a lot of talk
I-
years ago about like about COVID and quarantine really changing people's like approach to living, and I'm curious, like 4 years past that, is that still kind of like informing?
Yeah, I mean, I think everyone's into comfort now,
Mhm.
more so than ever, and how they're going to use the room, and they actually think about it more than they
Mm.
did before. I also think they think about value and how what that plays into it, because I think we realize, and I touch upon this in the book, that there's really no such thing anymore as our forever house. So people are looking at it differently investment wise, whereas they think, for whatever reason it might be, they're not going to be there forever. So let's try it out. Let's see, let's test it out. But we don't necessarily need to spend our whole life savings doing this, because we might not be here forever. You know what I think? And that's really COVID that's made that happen. It's just a different mindset.
And you yourself have moved too. And I think that's what's so beautiful about your book, is just speaking to the forever home, but really what home is. And it's a collection of homes, of course, in your book. But even for you, has it, with all your moving, has it really changed? You talked about really paring down, but what does that really mean? Just so like something tangible that listeners could get. Does that mean you're not fully designing out rooms? Or are you just kind of,
No, not necessarily. This sounds sort of horrible, but I think I'm a little bit more laissez-faire about it now. Like, as long as it looks good and looks good for now. And also, like, what's wonderful, there's so many outlets now that you can decorate a room and finish a room and accessorize a room very differently than you used to. It's so immediate now. I can order it, online, and order it in your beautiful catalogs, and it shows up, 5
yeah,
days later.
yeah.
So that's changed, and I think there's so many cute things these days that you don't necessarily I said this before, I don't think you need to spend your whole life savings to decorate a room. I think
Mhm.
it's all about, and I think that's changed my mindset a little bit. Um, but yes, it doesn't seem so permanent. And again, I think that's all in our minds of, if I don't love Greenwich, for instance, okay, let's go try something else out. Whereas I don't think you would be so likely to do that 10 years ago.
Mm.
I was building, when I was 35 years old, I was building all my clients' houses that you knew they were going to die in. They weren't doing this for a 5-year thing, or to flip it, or to think about moving cities or whatever it might be. They were there for life. And I think that mindset is changed a little bit today.
What about, you mentioned that you have a 5-year-old now, and I imagine that Taryn and I both have young kids too, and it's like that is a very trying time on your home, and you have a lot of different needs,
and your liquor cabinet.
Yes, for sure. So like, how has that changed? Has that changed your approach to decor? I have to imagine it has.
Yes, it absolutely has. I think that your just general day-to-day living and how you're going to live in the house and bedtimes change, and that nice casual drinks that you're going to have at 7:00 doesn't happen so much anymore. It's all about bedtime for 2 hours. And, you guys aren't seeing this on the podcast, but I have a nice black eye shiner on my eye because I was trying to put my daughter to bed a couple of nights ago and she kicked me right in the face, accidentally, but they're growing so fast, they don't know their own strength. Obviously, like now when we go anywhere, it's 100% about her first. And, is she comfortable? Is her bed there? Are all her stuffies with her? We travel, when we even go away for the weekend, there's 3 duffel bags, which are quite small. And then there's 1 full duffel bag that's huge, full of stuff, stuffed animals and whatnot. And they all have to come. And that's, that's priority.
Don't forget one. You won't hear the end of it.
No, but the worst is the return trip. God forbid you leave a stuffy where you're visiting. That's the.
I bought a backup of a favorite at one point because I was like, it was a smaller one, and I was like, this guy's gonna get left. We're not.
I know, but they know.
I know.
They know.
They
know
it's
smell,
not real. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, no, I think kids' rooms are kind of hard because of their. For me, I've had trouble because you plan it for this baby, and then this baby is only a baby for a year and a half, kind of, and then you have a toddler, and then you're planning, and that season of life is so small, and so it is this, like your room probably could last 5 to 10 years of you being content in it and designed well before you're kind of wanting to change things, but like a kid's room, you're like, by the time it settles. You're like, well, we got to transition the bed. We got to.
I know. Yeah. There's been a lot of transitioning of beds, and that itself has been, I'm fortunate enough to go through that exercise that I just didn't know before. Mm-hmm. I didn't grasp it. Even if my clients had 2 or 3 kids standing there, I had no idea what they did after I left.
You were like, it's beautiful. Enjoy.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah. So that's been an interesting lesson to learn.
Have you looked back at anything that you're like, that was probably a little dangerous, or
a beautiful Gustavian bed when she was 2? Like, really, what was I thinking? That's in the book. That's in the Montecito house. This beautiful bed that I bought her that lasted a month before we had to get rid of it because she hurt herself on it, and I was just not thinking correctly.
I always, the thing I find hard is like I design it and sort of plan everything based on how it's going to look, clean. But it rarely ever looks clean, right? Like, because if, at your own house, your own bedroom and stuff, like you're imagining the bed being made and the things off the floor. And for the most part, I keep the rest of our house that way, certainly my own room. But a kid's room, it never looks like it does clean, or at least ours doesn't.
I know.
So it's like,
do you know?
How do you design for something to look good when it's messy?
Do you know what's so funny is just before I came on, I was discussing, now James, my daughter, is transitioning to a desk. And we were talking about this desk and what the chair is going to look like and the lamp. And like, of course, and then you imagine like a beautiful like thing of pencils that are all matching colors, maybe pink. And then you're like, wait a minute, she's going to have Wicked like posters and stickers. and everything all over this desk,
Mhm.
and it's not going to look like
Yeah.
what I'm thinking.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't know. I guess, it's
Did you just
It's
let it
all-
go, or do you try to
Yeah.
pick things you think will look
no,
good?
they're always arranged. There's always, all the mermaids are lined up every morning. It's definitely the longest pickup of
Mhm.
the, just the cleanup of her room
Mhm.
takes 5 times longer than the whole house every morning. Yeah.
This is great, though. This really makes me feel better. So thank you
Yeah.
for that.
It does. I will say my favorite part of probably the morning and working from home, most days we're hybrid. And so most days when I'm home is the reset and getting all the beds made and the stuffies lined up like you said.
Do you make all the beds, Tara?
I do, because again, then I can walk past the room and have that, what we talk
Yeah.
about on here is that ease of just like things have places, even if, it's hard.
And isn't that even if it lasts 15 minutes, isn't that a nice sort of breather in your day of like, my
Yeah.
house is
Well,
in some
it's
sort
8
of
hours,
semblance.
right? And I got 8 or 9 hours
Yeah.
till they're home. So there's a little bit of
Yeah.
that, like, yes, and I know I'm just grateful I have that opportunity. I didn't when I'm in office because you run out the door, you run in the door, and so it's a different situation for sure. But it is the silver lining to the craziness that is this phase of life, I should say.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah.
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 I just closed her door. I'm in a place now where I'm like, I'm not going to take on cleaning your room. I can't.
I think that's
Is this a 6-year-old?
Yeah, she's sick. So I'm like,
Okay. I'm not quite there yet. Yeah.
So there's a lot of like nagging to clean. Anyway, it's an ongoing process. But I just closed the door, and the rest of the house I'll pick up. But
Yeah. Yeah.
well, I'm glad, like you
it's
said,
a
it was
learning
nice.
curve.
I was glad to know that you also have these problems.
Exactly.
I did want to
Yeah.
circle back though to, we were talking about antiques because you do them so well, and I think your time in Europe really probably influenced how well you layer them into spaces, especially all these beautiful homes in California that they don't read as just that perfect California like Caroline was saying. But in the book, you had a few homes you kind of spoke to the clients, not necessarily liking antiques. There was the one dance studio.
Oh, yes.
And can you talk a little bit?
I met her doing Tracy Anderson, and she said, I hate color and I hate antiques. And I'm like, oh, okay. She's actually one of my favorite people. I've done a couple of houses for her, but they all have to be neutral. She doesn't look at the price tag of things and then all of a sudden does on certain things. But it has to be neutral. I would say she's a lot more plush. She's a lot more like, I don't know, like the word, it's just so plush and cozy, but in a very minimal way. And I've taken a lot of lessons from that too, of her design aesthetic, which is, wasn't necessarily mine, but some of it, ends up growing on you. And I think that's an interesting lesson for an interior designer to sort of, learn from their clients as well of what they like and how you can incorporate it into your style and merge the two and make it look great. But she's an interesting character. I think I've done 3 houses for them now in Colorado and California. And it's definitely, it's funny because it's a lot of people's favorite house in the book. So we'll see. I'm excited to share it.
Yeah, no, it's a beautiful space. And I found that so funny because I think wherever you wrote the words, like she doesn't like antiques, and then the first picture is this gorgeous old chest on the stucco walls. And I was like, so I see
snuck
you
that
won.
in.
I see you won
Yeah.
here.
And actually, she ended up loving that the most.
Of course.
It's a very funny thing about it. It's a very funny thing about that client because, it was during COVID and I installed it and nobody was there. It was very quiet. She was away. She was in Argentina or somewhere. And about a year and a half later, she calls me and she said, this house is amazing. It's so gorgeous. And I'm like, what? And she's like, yeah, I just walked in. I've never seen it before. And I'm like, oh, wow. That's
How
Yeah.
wild.
that's goals. To
Yeah.
I mean, wild.
have so many houses that you don't go there for a year and a half. But she was absolutely in love with it. She's
Mhm.
like, we got to do another one like this. So,
Yeah. Would you do more
Silly.
antique? Could you do more antiques in the next one? Do you think that chest convinced her?
I think she's coming around. Yeah.
Well, you picked a great one because that was a really fabulous sideboard, and it,
Yes.
Mhm.
Well, Swedish antiques
yeah.
are my favorite. Yeah.
I think it's and tell me if I'm wrong, but the stucco part looks so, is it gray? Is it taupe?
It's actually a Venetian plaster.
Oh, it's a plaster, excuse me.
Yeah. Yeah.
You say that in here,
No,
my fault.
it looks very calm in the picture, but there's a lot of movement in it and a lot of texture, I think,
But it's
that
not,
you don't see.
but it's not like the white Venetian plaster. It's like,
No.
it's,
No. It's more of a sandy textured one.
okay.
That gives it a little bit of rusticity. That happens to be up in Aspen. So
Wow. It's really
It's
beautiful.
gorgeous.
I mean, it makes it so serene in here. I imagine it's like the calmest space, or so it feels.
yes. Yes.
And the tile too that you use, the checkered.
Yeah.
I mean, what stone is that?
I think when you know the clients too, they're the last thing from calm. So that's always the balance. I think it's always the calm people that have the crazy houses that are very colorful and English and kooky, and it's the exact opposite here.
Ah, so good.
That's so insightful. I wonder if there is something to that, needing that balance or something.
I think they're needing that balance. And I think if you really look at who interior designers work for their clients, usually there's a balance within the person too of, the calm ones usually hire the more wacky interior designers and vice versa. And I think I'm more the laid back guy. So I always get the crazy client.
Okay, so speaking of crazy clients, so your Sullivan Canyon home, or
Project.
that project.
Yeah.
Can we talk about those clients? Because I would say that one is so crazy kooky, from like the actual furniture elements and the details.
Isn't it?
It's awesome.
I will say that client in particular was probably my most involved client. She was involved in every single thing. Again, hated water and hated the color blue and hated window coverings. Everything I love. So
the blue in particular.
We built that house with Howard Backen, the late Howard Backen of Napa architect, Backen and Backen. And that was an interesting process because even she, with the architecture, every single thing had to be visited over and over and over again before she approved it.
And
What a
there's so
special
many
project, yeah.
Yeah, there's so many natural elements, like the roof being this tin, like rusty.
Yeah.
How do you even, again?
Oh, every piece.
Every
we
piece
stood
was
there for days. Yeah, no, it's too rusty, that one. Move it over, move it to the left, move it to the right. Yeah, she stood there. And I love that house because there's actually no family room in that house. The family room is that big desk area. And it's more of this sort of, they all like to work around this big work table. It happened long before COVID. And what a great thing they had during COVID was this space that they could all sort of communicate and work around this big, huge work table. The whole family, there's 2 daughters and the parents.
That is crazy that they all worked around that. And just so many so many antique objects, and like, again, just crusty things that I'm just to follow each step of that, right? Again, like you said, even the boards on the wall all are rustic and look like they're all reclaimed. I'm shocked. It's beautiful. And the bricks, were the bricks reclaimed too? There's like...
The bricks are all reclaimed too.
Oh my gosh.
Exquisite surfaces. Yeah. Everyone handpicked.
Well, I just wanted to talk more about this one house because it is so eclectic that I just want to understand. I know the client was really involved, but it's so beautifully done, and to describe it to people would be, I feel like it's got
I
kooky.
mean, the only way I could describe our working together on that house is it was so convoluted to mix these sort of very rustic old antiques she had and mix them together in this very contemporary space. All the floors are concrete. There's no window coverings anymore or anywhere, and it looks right out to a horse pasture and this beautiful garden, this picking garden that they just live on this compound, and on top of it, it's right in the middle of Brentwood. So,
Wow.
it's a very interesting. I call it the rock and roll farmhouse because it's just.
I think that's a good, because even like the light fixtures are retro, and or you had one handmade or whatever for her to match one she found in France. And the art being old, it just is so, again, I think that's a great way to describe it. Everyone has to see this house just because, again, it doesn't follow your
Not at all.
Yeah.
It looks completely different from anything in the book.
To get to that part of the book, I was like, what is happening? I am in.
Yeah.
But
That
the way
first
you mix,
shot with the
Oh my
black
gosh.
leather sectional, you're like, oh, okay, we're somewhere entirely different now.
but you have done it
Love it.
so well that
Mhm.
it's not overwhelming. Like if I had to take these same elements and put them in a space, I feel like I would look like, I was a bad antique shop. And you know what I mean?
Yeah.
You've done it so
was
well.
very hard and a very particular each piece. I think that's what I was saying in the beginning of this, was each piece was chosen with such care.
Yeah.
And it had to be, because otherwise it would look like a junk shop.
How long
be
did that take? How long did that project take?
We built that from the ground up, so it definitely was probably 3 years
Wow.
that we were decorating as we were designing the house. So
In a project like that, when
was a
each
fun-
piece is, it seemed almost like every single piece is an antique or nearly.
mhm.
How do you like lay out the space? And because I always find it so intriguing, like how to, I guess, plan something that you really have to rely on like happening upon the right piece.
Yeah.
But then, like, so how do you? What's your process there?
Well, it's all about intimacy in a space, whether it be a conversation space or a homework space or a living room. I always pick one thing first. And, sometimes people think I'm a little crazy. I will come into a project that we're just starting construction, and I'll come in with like an antique set of bowls. And they're like, what? And I think, you have to look at the final way you're going to live in the house as you're building. I think that's really important for me to incorporate that. And to have this focal point that you're working around, that you want the final outcome to, achieve something that an end goal, whether it be a lampshade or, a great bowl or a table, but it's usually something, it's never anything too big. It's not like, but it's just sort of one thing that sets the tone for the rest of the house.
So in like a living room, for example, are you like picking? I mean, how do you do the layout though? Like, are you picking the sectional because the size of your sectional is then going to determine the size of your chairs and your coffee table? But so are you going out knowing like I have to have a coffee table that are these dimensions, and I'm just gonna either design something or
Yeah, I think there's usually one thing picked, or I'm looking at the size of the family, or how they entertain, or how they don't entertain, and they're home with 2 kids or whatever it might be. So I'm really looking at their lifestyle, which is sometimes intrusive for them, especially when we're getting to know each other. I think it's important to know how they really live, not the way they say. I've had so many clients that have said, "Oh, I cook every night," And, we sit around this table and there's candlelight and blah, blah, blah. And then you go over there, they basically order in every night and sit at the kitchen counter. So you have to get past what they think they live like and actually see what they are actually living like. And, go from there. But I think when I start a room, I think it's all about scale. I think, intimacy in a room is very important for me. So I really whether it be furniture groupings or how do you make this vast space sometimes feel comfortable and cozy and normal, I think. So you want to sit there or lay there, more importantly. There's a lot that goes into that. I don't think it just happens.
Yeah.
And I'm very fortunate that most of my work is, I would say 65% of it is from the ground up. So I have a lot of time to think about it.
Yeah.
But also, like, when I do have a house, it's just a renovation. Like, it's sometimes nice to just be standing there and looking at the light and going, wow, this is easy. But sometimes it's not.
Yeah.
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 So.
Well, I loved the color palettes because, you have a definitely palette. It's sort of like you've got watery blues, but the thing that I loved about it is like you've got every shade and every variation, and so you're really kind of everything from like barely blue gray to indigo and every single color in between. And I love how because the end result is so effortless, right? Like it feels as though it is not kind of overly decorated like you talked about, and it sort of looks like it just evolved. And of course I know it didn't because you put in a ton of work, but talk to me about the color and like I guess how you sort of start adding touches of these blue colors
Got it.
Instead of it matching.
Do you know what's funny? I'm known for blue, but if you really go through the book, it's more about the state of blue rather than the actual blue color. Because when you really look at it all together, there's not that much blue. It's funny, that black sectional you were just talking about, that's this leather big sofa in that Sullivan Canyon house.
Is it blue?
That was actually blue. It's sort of a navy royal blue. And that was me sneaking blue in, even though she said, I hate blue, blah, blah. I think it was me sneaking in blue because she needed that calming, and especially with her personality, she needed that calming element. And I think blue was a nice grounding force in that room that needed to calm all those warm colors down, especially being, a mile from the beach. That it felt right in there, and it felt effortless, as you're saying. And I think she, ended up falling in love with it because it was just sort of unexpected to her and not what she had in her mind going into the project. But I think blue is a state of mind. I think it's a calming color. And I think whether it be a beach house or a Manhattan, penthouse, I think when you really look at it, and even this in my own house, is people that walk into my own house are, which you see the last house in the book. It's sort of flanked by East Coast, West Coast house. When you look at the last house, it's so traditional and so formal, and that Greenwich house, you feel like there's a lot more blue than is actually there. And that's a nice compliment to my design because that's what I was striving for.
No, you're right. It's really not that much blue. Even your background right now, you've got the chambray shirt, your boat that has touches of blue, the wallpaper looks like it's got, and it just, it's this, you're right. It is more like an overall feeling of blue versus just decorating with blue. But there was one room in particular, and I'm going to try to find it, but there was like two sofas or maybe it was sofa and two chairs, but they were both blue, but they were totally different shades, different, one was a little bit lighter, one was a little bit darker, totally different textiles, one might have, I think, was like something a little nubbier. And so is that kind of the secret, just doing different textures to add dimension?
I definitely love dimension, and I think mixing textures is so important. If you're going to have, 2 or 3 linen things in a room, you definitely have to mix it with a cashmere or a wool or a nubby something, to not make it feel all the same, because otherwise it just ends up being flat. And that's what I try and stay away from. Even if you're right on the beach, you still have to give something textural and lovely and luxurious to not feel like you're just right on the beach. So I think that's all about the surprise of what's in the room.
I found the project. It was that Marin County project, and it had those 2 great blue sort of shelter arm sofas.
Yeah.
And then I can't tell if it's a sofa or a chair, but it had this other blue chair, and one was a little bit more green. And anyway, we get questions from listeners all the time, like asking, do these colors match? And I think that's something that is.
I don't think there's such thing as matching. I think you can, whether it be blues or greens, you can't really, there's definitely colors when you try and match. That's when you probably start making mistakes and clashing. I think some of the best rooms are just things you brought in that you found. And that starts to look decorated, to be honest. I think it's all about the evolution of a piece of furniture. And, I tend to keep a lot of furniture forever and sort of reupholster it, refinish it, and change the life of what it looks like. So I never really buy anything, that I don't love the shape of first. And then the color can always change, whether it be the legs, whether it be the, whatever it is. My refinisher's always in my house refinishing something.
Well, that was a gorgeous project. And there was I think the more formal living room in that space had, with the big mirror, or the big round mirror.
That's one of my favorite rooms. Yeah.
God, that is gorgeous. And again, there's sort of an overall blueness to it, although truly it's like a pillow and like one Swedish armoire.
Yeah. Yeah.
So
you're absolutely right there, because she didn't really love blue either. So,
so pretty.
She definitely didn't want it. There were a few things that were passed on because she didn't want it to feel like a beach house. And I don't think it does. It just feels very calming.
In this room in particular, there's a beautiful mix of antiques. I know we're kind of getting back to this, but, just different wood tones. And is there any sort of, I guess, guideline you would suggest people follow about mixing antiques? Is there?
No, I think if you really look at that room, and that's a great example, that parchment, almost very Jean-Michel Frank kind of coffee table that I designed is very contemporary. And it was pieces of parchment, and there's a very contemporary fireplace. I think, I had to do that, or else it would look fussy and old lady. And again, it's just all about thinking and being, very, I don't want to say particular, because some of those pieces were just sort of thrown in there, but in a very contrived way. So, thoughtful. I think you just need to be thoughtful to each piece and really respect it. And I think when you start to do that, it all starts to work together really nicely.
Well, the whole book is just absolutely gorgeous. I just felt like it was such a great, for anyone who feels like maybe they need a little refresher course in editing, you just are such a great editor. Your spaces feel so light, but they have so much warmth to them. And that I feel like is a very, really hard balance to strike. So I enjoyed
Oh,
that.
thank you. Thank you. Well, I hope you enjoy. I can't wait to see. I'm getting my hard copy this week, so I'm excited.
Hello, ladies and Jeffrey. I love the down-to-earth and inclusive design conversations you have on this podcast. I've been renovating my home for the past 4 years, and I'm finally in the home stretch. Just countertops, baseboards, casings, and a few finishing touches like decorative toe kicks are left. But I'm stuck on what to do for my backsplash. I'm planning on green-tinged soapstone counters with quite a bit of movement. There will be an overhang on the peninsula for stools. So that will be larger than the temporary plywood tops pictured. I would like to replace the range with a slide-in eventually. All the windows in
that would be nice. Yeah.
All the windows in this open concept room are north-facing, so I'm concerned about a cave effect if soapstone is used for a full backsplash. I don't love tile, mostly because I find it hard to clean, and we cook from scratch almost every night. Subway tile is a different no because I don't like the look. So the biggest issue is the wall with the sink and the window. Tiling to the ceiling seems like a lot since there are no cabinets, but there would be an awkward cutoff between the counter that will end about 6 inches shy of the sliding glass door, and an 18-inch tile backsplash feels too builder grade. I need a backsplash behind the sink, though. So yes, she's got this sort of open concept. She's got a peninsula, and sort of on the other side of the peninsula is a sliding glass door. So where does she end her? What would you do if this were your house?
I looked at this earlier just briefly, and I thought, this would be a perfect excuse to use my Summerlin tile from the tile shop that I just designed and tile the entire wall. And I would probably take that tiled wall all the way down the sliding glass door wall. That was one idea. I think painting the baseboards would be an interesting idea too, just to start with the baseboards. But I also thought off to the left, there is a cabinet that I almost want to see it the same color as the kitchen and make it feel like this one unified space. Somehow the window itself feels small. And I think there's a way to do the backsplash. I mean, I honestly just did a kitchen similar to this in layout in that it was small and a little darker, and I did a stainless steel backsplash all the way up to the ceiling. And I know that sounds like industrial kitchen, but it really wasn't. The stainless steel gave a nice glow in the kitchen and gave a nice reflective quality. And I really found it kind of warm and nicer. And that would be nice mixed with if they wanted to use that soapstone. I think if you're going to do something like a subway tile, and I also loved my, it's called Birchwood white ceramic from my Summerlin tile collection at the tile store. That, just to tile the whole wall, I think always looks so good. And then again, I thought beadboard would be nice too, because then you could take that all the way down. You do have a problem behind the stove that you've got to be careful with, but maybe you beadboard the entire room, or like a shiplap or something, and then you stop it on just that wall and do a tile. It feels to me like the cabinetry itself is a little low if you're going to replace that burner above it. So you might think about taking out that upper. It would also give it a lot more space and feel a little bit more open. But there's so many things you could do with this kitchen. I think it's, cute and cozy, and I think you just need to look at reflective quality. You're going to get that with tile. One, especially if you use a light tile, and you're going to get it from stainless steel. So that's probably what I would do. And I know there's that weird intersection. I think I would just do like a beautiful piece of wood that felt like it was a part of the kitchen right down the line. And maybe you even bring it up and do a little bit of, whether it be a 3-inch almost like a shaker style, very simple around the top where the stainless steel or tile or whatever it is meets that. And then you consolidate this kitchen a little bit and make it feel like it's its own self.
Is it strange if the tile ends 6 inches from the sliding glass door? And it kind of sounds like, unless you put a piece of wood there, that's a yes.
Yeah. It is strange. I mean, I have seen it where if you're going to tile like that and there's this weird sort of intersection, usually I would lay the tile back a little bit so the tile died right into the drywall and not above it. But that's a big job. That's taking off the drywall. I mean, that's a big job. So, I mean, I would at least get a piece of stainless and see how she likes it. It might not be her vibe, and I don't know what the rest of the house looks like, but it certainly would give it this interesting, reflective light quality in that room and make it feel special. And I know that lately there's a paint out there that you can do that look with, that zinc or whether that metal look, and paint it. But behind the stove, it's again an issue, and you don't want a dark room. So I'm all for light rooms. I think if it was my own room, I'd probably beadboard, or I'd
like a wood pan,
shiplap all the way down behind it, and then paint that off to the left the same color as the kitchen.
Okay.
And do it white so it's nice and contrasting. I think that would be really pretty. And especially if you mitered it right into the window, it would look very custom and very special.
And then would you do the tile behind the oven or would you do the wood, the shiplap behind the oven too?
I don't know what she's doing for a new oven, but if it was going to be a gas oven, I'd probably just do a piece of white marble if I was going to do a shiplap. So it's sort of, when you looked at it, it kind of went away. Because I don't mind doing, and there's some great looking white marble, again, at the tile shop that looks like white marble, but it's not. And you could do that all over the walls. But I definitely wouldn't I think she's right on that fact that I wouldn't do the soapstone all the way up the walls. I think she'd feel cavernous in there and a little claustrophobic.
Okay. Well, Devin, thank you for sending in your question, and best of luck. We're so glad you enjoyed the show. Thanks,
Devin. I hope I'm helpful.
For sure. It's always just helpful to get a second opinion, get some eyes on it. So,
yeah.
Jeffrey, thank you so much. It was lovely to see your book and lovely to have you.
Thank you so much. Thanks for the time, and I will see you guys in Atlanta.
Yes.
We'll put it on our calendars.
For a physical book signing. I like it.
I'd love that.
Well, beautiful work, and we've enjoyed your portfolio so much. So thank you so much for your time and all your beautiful work.
Yeah. Oh, thank you.
And that's our show. You can find all of the show notes on our blog, howtodecorate.com/podcast.
To send in a decorating dilemma, email your questions to podcast@ballarddesigns.net so we can help you with your space.
And of course, be sure to follow us on social media at Ballard Designs.
Don't forget to subscribe wherever you get your podcasts so you never miss an episode. And please leave us a review. We'd love to hear your feedback.
Until next time, happy
decorating.